I was standing in the corner of the reception hall, a tray of half-eaten appetizers in my hands and a grease stain on my cheap white shirt, when my life finally imploded in the most spectacular way possible. Imagine being the only person at your brother's $1,000-a-plate wedding who wasn't allowed to sit at a table, let alone eat the food, all because your parents decided 30 years ago that you weren't a daughter, but an insurance policy and a live-in maid. I had spent my entire life being the shadow in the room, the one who cleaned the floors while my brother, Leo, went to private school, and the one who worked 3 jobs to pay for his Ivy League tuition while I was told that college was a waste of time for someone like me. My parents, Sela's and Margaret, always told me I was lucky they kept me at all, that I owed them for the roof over my head, and that my purpose in life was to ensure Leo had everything he ever wanted. But as I stood there watching the elite of the city toast to my brother's success and his beautiful new bride, I realized that I was the only one who knew the truth about the monsters sitting at the head table. I want to ask you honestly, would you have stayed silent for the sake of family? Or would you have burned it all down the moment you saw a chance to escape? Tell me if I was wrong for what I did, because by the end of this night, I wasn't the servant anymore. I was the guest of honor they never saw coming. To understand how I ended up serving drinks at my own brother's wedding, you have to understand the dynamic of the Miller household. From the time I was 6 years old, I knew I was different. Leo was the golden child, the miracle boy who could do no wrong. I, on the other hand, was the practical child. My mother used to say that some people were born to lead and others were born to support, and she made it very clear which category I fell into. While Leo was at soccer practice or violin lessons, I was at home learning how to iron his shirts without a single wrinkle. While Leo was opening expensive gifts on his birthday, I was in the kitchen preparing the meal for his friends. My parents didn't see me as a person, they saw me as a utility. They pulled me out of high school the moment I turned 16, claiming they needed me at home to help with my father's ailing health, which was really just a code for him wanting someone to fetch his beer and remote while he sat on the porch. I spent years working under-the-table cleaning jobs and retail shifts, only to hand every single cent over to my mother, who would then deposit it into Leo's future fund. They told me it was my duty as a sister. They told me that when Leo was a big, successful lawyer, he would take care of me. It was a lie I swallowed for years because I didn't know anything else. I was isolated, gaslighted, and convinced that I was fundamentally worth less than the ground Leo walked on. When Leo met Clara, the daughter of a massive real estate mogul named Arthur Sterling, my parents saw their ultimate payday. They weren't just happy for him, they were salivating. They spent months coaching me on how to behave when the Sterlings were around, which basically meant staying out of sight. I wasn't invited to the engagement party. I wasn't invited to the rehearsal dinner. My parents told the Sterlings that I was a distant relative with some cognitive struggles, who preferred to live a quiet life in the back of the house. It was humiliating, but I was so broken down by years of their psychological warfare that I just nodded and kept scrubbing the baseboards. Then came the wedding. It was a multi-million-dollar affair at the most prestigious estate in the county. My parents, of course, couldn't afford a gift or even their own formal wear, so they used the last of my savings, money I had been hiding under a floorboard for 3 years, to buy themselves a tuxedo and a designer gown. When I found out, I confronted them, and my father actually laughed. He told me that I should be grateful I was even allowed to attend as staff, so I could see how the other half lived. They literally made a deal with the catering company to hire me as an extra server for the night, so they wouldn't have to pay for my presence. So there I was, weaving through tables of people who looked like they stepped out of a magazine, carrying a tray and wearing a mask of subservience. I watched my mother, Margaret, sipping vintage champagne and acting like she was the queen of high society, telling everyone who would listen how proud she was of her son's achievements, never mentioning that those achievements were built on my broken back. Leo didn't even look at me. When I passed him a glass of water, he took it without a word, his eyes sliding over me as if I were a piece of furniture. It was the ultimate betrayal. I had given him my life, and he couldn't even give me a nod of recognition. I was reaching my breaking point, feeling the heat of the room and the weight of 20 years of resentment bubbling up in my throat. I was about to drop the tray and just walk out into the night, leaving it all behind, when I was called over to the head table. Arthur Sterling, the bride's father, wanted a refill. He was a man of immense power, the kind of person who could ruin a life with a single phone call, and my parents were practically vibrating with nerves whenever he spoke. As I leaned over to pour the wine, my hair tucked tightly behind my ears and my head bowed, my hand shook just a little. Arthur was talking to my father about some investment, but the moment I stepped into his line of sight, he stopped mid-sentence. He didn't just look at me, he stared. I felt his eyes burning into the side of my face, and for a second I thought I had done something wrong. I thought I had spilled wine on his expensive suit. My father's face went pale. He started stammering, trying to distract Arthur, telling some loud, obnoxious joke to pull his attention away. But Arthur didn't budge. He reached out and caught my wrist not roughly, but with a firm, steady grip that made the whole table go silent. He looked at me, then looked at my father, and then back at me. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, and I could see the sweat beads forming on my father's forehead. My mother was clutching her pearls so hard I thought the string would snap. This was the moment where everything hung in the balance. I had a choice to make. I could pull away, apologize for the interruption, and go back to being the invisible servant, or I could finally look up. So that is the situation I found myself in, trapped between the people who had enslaved me for decades and a stranger who looked at me like he had seen a ghost. Before I tell you what happened when I finally met his eyes, I want you to pause right now. Go down to the comments and tell me if you had been treated like a second-class citizen your entire life, and you finally had the chance to blow up the lives of the people who hurt you, would you do it? Or would you keep the peace to avoid a scene at a wedding? I really want to know what you would do in my shoes before you hear the rest. I looked up. I looked Arthur Sterling dead in the eye, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look away. His face went from confusion to absolute cold fury in the span of 3 seconds. He didn't look at me like I was a server. He looked at me with a recognition that sent a chill down my spine. "Alina," he whispered. My name. He knew my name. My parents hadn't told anyone my name. To the Sterlings, I was just the help. My father tried to intervene, his voice high and frantic. "Arthur, please, she's just a girl we hired to help out. She's a bit slow, don't mind her." But Arthur roared for him to shut up. The entire ballroom went dead quiet. The music stopped. Hundreds of people were staring at the head table. Arthur stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the marble floor. He looked at my mother and father with a disgust so pure it was terrifying. "You told me your daughter died in the hospital 30 years ago," Arthur said, his voice echoing through the hall. My heart stopped. I looked at my parents, whose faces were now the color of ash. My mother tried to speak, but only a dry croak came out. Arthur turned back to me, his eyes softening but filled with tears. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn, laminated photograph he kept in his wallet. He held it up next to my face. It was a picture of a woman who looked exactly like me. Same eyes, same jawline, same slight curve to the nose. "This was my sister, Alina," Arthur said to the room. "She died 30 years ago in a car accident, but before she passed, she gave birth to a baby girl. A baby girl who was supposed to be placed with a loving family through a private adoption. I was only 20 then. I didn't have the means to take her, but I checked on the family. I was told by the agency, and by these people, that the baby had a heart defect and passed away within a week." The realization hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't their servant daughter. I wasn't their daughter at all. I was the niece of one of the wealthiest men in the country, and my parents had kidnapped me through a series of lies and faked documents just to have a free laborer. They had taken the adoption money Arthur's family had provided for my care and used it to kickstart their own lives, all while keeping me as a prisoner to ensure I never found out who I was. They had told Arthur I was dead so he would stop looking, and they told me I was a burden so I would never leave. The rage that built up inside me was unlike anything I've ever felt. I looked at Silas and Margaret, the people I had spent 20 years trying to please, the people I had given my youth and my health to. They weren't my family, they were my captors. Arthur didn't wait for an explanation. He called his security team over and had my parents, and Leo escorted out of the building in front of every prominent person in the city. Leo was screaming that he didn't know anything, that it wasn't his fault, but Arthur didn't care. He told them that if they ever stepped foot near me again, he would use every resource at his disposal to ensure they spent the rest of their lives behind bars for fraud and human trafficking. The wedding was over. The bride, Clara, was in tears, but even she looked at my parents with horror. Arthur took me into a private room, and for the first time in my life, I was treated like a human being. He apologized 1,000 times for not finding me sooner, for believing the lies of people who looked so respectable on paper. The aftermath was a whirlwind. Arthur's legal team went to work immediately. They found the original adoption papers and the forged death certificate. It turns out my parents had a gambling debt 3 decades ago and saw a vulnerable baby as a way to get a payout and a permanent maid. They are currently facing multiple felony charges, and Leo's perfect life has completely crumbled. He lost his job at the law firm when the scandal broke, and Clara filed for an annulment a week later. As for me, my life started at 30. Arthur didn't just give me money, he gave me a family. I'm currently back in school, getting the education I was denied, and I finally have a room of my own in a house where I'm not expected to scrub the floors. Looking back, I realized that my parents didn't raise me, they exploited me. They tried to bury me, but they didn't realize I was a seed. I've learned that family isn't about blood, and sometimes, the people who share your DNA are the ones you need to run from the fastest. It's been a long road to healing, but standing up that night was the best thing I've ever done. If you ever feel like you're being held back by people who claim to love you but only want to use you, take this as your sign to walk away. Like this video if you think I did the right thing by exposing them at the wedding, and make sure to subscribe for more stories about people finding their power. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Did Leo deserve to lose everything too, or was he just a victim of our parents' lies? I'll see you all in the next story.